Hello, it's not Scott Manley. So it's the Gamer Nerd. Check the YouTube channel. Anyways, today, I'm just going to do a quick little Let's Play in KSP, because I've got an SR-71 Blackbird. Well, you know, obviously one that's been, let's see, where is it? There it is. For whatever reason, it's up there. So we're going to take this bad boy out for a spin. And I think I'm actually going to put this out on a Tuesday. Normally don't see Let's Plays from me on a Tuesday, but it's just going to be short, probably a couple minutes. So I'm going to set the brakes, and we are going to start the engines at, we're going to bring the throttle down to 25%, give or take, and start the engines while holding the brakes. Let's make sure our brakes are set to 200%, I guess, probably. Well, no, because, I don't know. Maybe that's what it is, but you shouldn't call it 200%. Otherwise, it'd just be 50% normal. Alright, so all of our brakes are up to 200. Engines are at 25%. We're going to start them, let them spool up for a second. We've got 32, 35 kilonewtons. We've got 40 kilonewtons, and we are going to hit full throttle and release the brakes. Full throttle first, and release the brakes. Here we go, man. 100 kilonewtons. We're at 40 meters per second. We're going to turn on stabilization. Does help a little bit. And pull up. Gear up. We're going to keep it low for a second. Build up some speed here. There we go. Let's climb up to an altitude of, let's say, 10,000 meters. And as these tanks are draining ever so slowly, also as these tanks are draining ever so slowly, we're losing weight, which makes it easier to fly. Also, as we pick up speed, we're gaining a little bit of thrust, and obviously that thrust kind of drops down with altitude. So there's a sweet spot for speed, probably around 12 to 15,000 meters. So we're going to keep going up. I picked up a little extra speed because we were dropping the thrust levels, and we want to basically what I'm trying to do now is maximize thrust to maximize the amount of energy. And we're climbing. We got 330 meters per second. We're climbing through 6,000 meters now. So we'll go up to 10,000 meters. Probably start lowering the nose a little bit. Let's check our thrust. Ooh, almost 200 kilonewtons, so we are doing pretty dang good right now. Because we're still in a thick atmosphere. It'll probably start, the kilonewton, the thrust will probably start dropping any time now. Even though we're going to keep speeding up because the atmosphere's thinner up here, so even if it doesn't drop, it's going to start stabilizing probably around 270, 280 looks like. It's slowing down. Oh, maybe 290 or 300 almost. So we're at 10,000 meters. Probably should have waited. Probably should have time accelerated to the day. But whatever. And there is the space center back there, and it looks like we've kind of maxed out here at 311 kilonewtons, and we're already dropping. We're picking up speed, but we're gaining altitude. So I guess the sweet spot probably is around 10,000, so we're going to put the nose down a little bit to start losing some altitude ever so gently. The kilonewtons is still dropping, so I must have done something wrong with my figuring, but yeah, we've got some pretty good heat trails coming off of that thing now. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to flip it around, but to do that, I'm going to want to slow down, because if I pull way up or way down right now, it is going to rip the wings off. Man, you can't hardly even see it in there. Our two Kerbals down there, not freaking out yet. They have no idea. Alright, we're gonna shut down the engines, just mostly for fun. Still see looks like some sonic stuff, we'll call it sonic stuff, sonic air disturbances coming off the back of this thing. Just gliding down into a little bit thicker atmosphere and slowing down. Probably around 500 or 400 meters per second, I'm going to kick the engines back on and rather than try to turn, I'm just gonna do a... Well, you'll see. You'll see. This is a much more effective course reversal procedure. Oh, maybe it would help if I turn the engines back on. Now, if you turn the engines off, you definitely want to turn them back on at idle and let them both kind of spool up a little bit first before. Otherwise, I'll show you in a minute what happens if you just turn one engine on. So this is my effective course reversal technique. Now the problem is we're at 7,000 meters, the atmosphere is thinner up here, so probably around 140 meters, or meters per second or so. Probably around 100 is when it's going to really start having some issues. I don't know for sure. Headed back to the... Let's find out. Let's see at what speed I will deploy the air brakes. And so I'm going to hold B, and then I'm just going to come up here and deploy them, so that way they're open, I don't have to hold a button. So we're just going to deploy the air brakes here, and slow down and see what airspeed do we really start having trouble controlling. Because, actually, let's go up a little bit before we do that. Gonna gain some altitude, probably up to 10,000 meters again, 30,000 feet, about the altitude of a jetliner. They fly between usually 30 and 40,000 feet. Usually the bigger the plane, like 747 service ceiling, I think is like 48,000, the new one. Whereas like a Scare Bus A319 is probably lucky to get up around 30. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but probably their service ceiling somewhere around 35,000. I don't know for sure. And we are approaching approximately 30,000 feet at 10,000 meters. There's 9. We're climbing at about 100 meters per second, so within about 7 seconds we should be up there. I'm just using 10,000 as kind of an arbitrary number to shoot for. And we do want to slow down, so I'm going to cut the engines. They're still putting out some thrust, and we're going to keep using that thrust to climb and slow down and climb and slow down. I think I just saw a glint of the Space Center over there, so we are doing good here. I'm going to keep the nose up just a little bit and see if we can get this thing down to under 100 meters per second and see what kind of control characteristics it has at those speeds at this altitude. So we're going to pull the nose up again to slow down a little bit. Alright, so you can see the velocity vector. The velocity vector, I love Scott Manley. If you don't know who that is, go check out his channel right now. He's like the king of Kerbal Space Program. So the velocity vector, see, that's an awful accent too. But point being, I'm pointed in a different direction than the aircraft is actually moving, and at 74 meters per second, down in, under 1,000 meters, let's say, or down in this thick atmosphere, the velocity vector would not be nearly this far off. So you can definitely see some differences in atmospheric control. So we're going to retract the brakes, and we'll hit full power, and we'll get this cart moving. And we're already at 400 kilonewtons. And one of the things I like to do, just kind of as a challenge to myself, is a minimum power go around. So I'm going to get down to like 100 feet over the runway over there at like 25 meters a second, and then just try to give myself maybe 25% power, and just basically it's all just timing and adrenaline and everything, but it'll be fun. And so I'm going to time accelerate. You can see it does, the wings get all, the engines push themselves out when you go ×4 time acceleration. It's kind of cool. Alright, so we are rapidly approaching the Space Center. Why am I not at time accelerating? At almost 1,000 meters a second, at 6,000 meters in altitude. Now, when you time accelerate, you definitely don't want to be messing with control surfaces and everything. And we are getting right close. This thing is very slippery. It doesn't like to slow down very much. So I've already cut the engines and deployed the speed brakes. I probably should have done it sooner, but time acceleration, my setup for Kerbal Space Program isn't really great yet. You kind of have to, I've got my hand in kind of a weird place where my keyboard is, where my mic is and everything. So that's kind of part of the problem, but not too awful. So, alright, so in a real airplane, one of the things you can do, there's a LD max, you call it. So anything, lift drag ratio max. So anything above that, and you're creating more parasite drag just with like dragging things through the air. Anything below that, it's creating so much drag to produce the lift, to lift the aircraft. So in order to descend in the shortest amount of time in real life, you want to get below LD max. It's not necessarily the safest practice. I'm just talking basically strictly aerodynamics here. You want to descend below, or slow down below LD max, because then your speed is reduced, which means you're not covering much distance in a certain amount of time, but your drag is greatly increased for the same amount of lift. Let's see if I'm just making sure my train of thought makes sense so far. Yes. So yeah, I mean it's really slowing you down for the same amount of lift, and it's also, I mean, so that's how you drop. Not necessarily, you would drop per time pretty quickly, but per distance you would drop a lot more than if you were faster. And I don't know how well the aerodynamics applies to KSP, and I honestly wish I knew more about different versions and different things you could install. I just got the base, I think it was like $40 just on kerbalispaceprogram.com or whatever, just the official website, downloaded it, and so far that's all I've done. So I don't know how well this replicates, but you can see the velocity vector is dropping down below our attitude indicator, I guess is what that would be. So in real life, yeah, you basically, for, again, not necessarily the best safety practice, and I don't do this in my actual airplane when I'm flying usually, unless I've listen, everything with airplanes is it's very circumstantial, and you have to do it based on a lot of knowledge. But okay, so it looks like we are at that point now where we are definitely below LD max, because look at how low the velocity vector is compared to our attitude indicator, which basically means we're just dropping like that, you know what I mean? Which is a good way to do per distance. But we're going to come in a little bit faster because we're still at 9,000 meters. So I've got my speed brakes deployed. I'm going to extend the gear because I'm assuming that whatever physics engine aerodynamic calculations this thing is running will take into account that the gear is creating some sort of drag. And it looks like the sun is coming up. Wait, rises in the east, sets in the west, which I went out at 90 degrees. That is west, rises in the east. So yeah, the sun should be coming up. Yeah, we're headed 270, which is west. Rises in the east. Oh, damn it. Maybe it is going down. I don't know. So 200 and... So this thing with the brakes out really isn't too slippery in the lower atmosphere. It's going to slow down pretty quickly to about 150, and then below that it takes a little bit longer to slow down anymore. But the point being, if you're up around 200 in the lower atmosphere, and you want to get lower, don't worry, that's going to happen real quick. It's this slow from like 150, 120 down below anything else. But because I don't want to take forever and we're still a ways out, I'm going to retract the gear and the speed brakes. We're going to set the attitude indicator at pretty much 0 degrees. And see, remember at, what were we at? 10,000 meters, give or take, at 74 meters per second. The velocity vector was way off of our attitude indicator. And we're already down to 60 meters per second, keeping in mind that airspeed is squared in all lift equations. So, anytime every time you double the airspeed, you increase all the forces on the aircraft by 4. So that little bit of difference, especially at the lower numbers, is a pretty big deal. Point being, we were at 60. Even now here at 40 meters per second, we're seeing less of a velocity vector attitude indicator difference than we saw at 10,000 meters with a 74 meters per second. So that really calls attention to how good the simulation is with altitude, because definitely as altitude increases in real aircraft, the effectiveness of all lifting surfaces and everything also decreases. So we're going to retract the brakes because we're down around 35 meters per second, and here's what I'm talking about with the minimum airspeed, or with the minimum power go around. So basically I'm lined up for a pretty dang good landing, if I do say so myself. Velocity vector is still bringing me off to the right a little bit, but there it looks like it's pretty much centered up right down, not quite the middle of the runway, but I'm using the keyboard for controls. I've never played this with a joystick. I'd imagine it'd probably be pretty fun. So, and now we are down to a dangerously low altitude, and we're on the ground. Son of a gun. See what I'm talking about? My setup here for the keyboard, I keep having to look down, and in that split second that I looked down, I was on the ground. So what I am going to do is take advantage of this time to time warp and get the sun up. There we go. Alright. So we'll go for a full power takeoff. I'm not even going to hold the brakes or anything. Let's see how much fuel we burned off. So we burned off a pretty good amount of fuel. Oh, I could look over here too, I guess. So it looks like maybe between a quarter and a third of our fuel is gone, which is a pretty significant amount of our weight is our fuel. So we burned off a good amount of weight. That was actually much easier to take off, I think. So what I am going to do is try that low power go around that I was talking about. So we're going to time warp. And I really don't like to make any maneuvers with this thing while time warping, especially at 4 times speed. So I slow it back down to 1, and we'll adjust there. as I just did, and time warp it back to 4. And at full power with the engines, only at 2,000 meters, the atmosphere is so thick we're only getting 366 meters per second. Now at the upper altitudes, because I really like this thing, I fly it all the time just for fun. At the upper altitudes, I know that I've gotten upwards of 1,200 meters per second, somewhere around 15,000 meters. I don't remember what our maximum airspeed was during this video, but it was probably somewhere around 1,000 meters per second. So we're upside down, but that's okay. We'll flip it back around and point this thing at, get the attitude indicator and try to get the velocity vector right on 90 degrees, because we were going at 270. So 90 degrees should bring us right back, hopefully even lined up on center line and everything, to the space center. And we'll time warp again, and I made just a tiny adjustment. You got to be real quick and careful when you're making adjustments while time warping with this thing. So I'm going to cut the engines now. Which sounds cool when it's time warped. It sounds cool anyway, but alright, we're going to pitch it up a little bit. We're losing altitude, and for whatever reason, you saw, I mean, this thing will operate at 1,000 meters per second, or 300 and some, you know, in the lower atmosphere. So that's really a more fair examination, I guess. That's probably comparison. Is 360 being its maximum speed when dealing with these low altitude numbers. So 360 being its max speed. At 100, our velocity vector and altitude indicator are pretty much the exact same, and then it's going to continue to be that way until we get probably to, what, 60s, where it started dropping just a touch, and then it'll stay flying all the way down to 30 meters per second. So I'm going to deploy the brakes again, and the gear. We want to get this bugger slowed down for a low, because if you do a low power go around when your speed is already built up, it's really not that big of a deal. But I was talking about that LD max curve. Basically, if you're below that curve, it takes a lot of energy to speed up. So it's really just kind of a fun game I play here. Would not recommend trying this in real life, especially with the engines, because in real life these turbo fan engines probably take 3 to 5 seconds to spool. These are basically the equivalent of a turbojet as far as I can tell, and those take between 8 and 10 seconds to spool up, whereas a piston engine is maybe a second, or, you know, maybe 2. An electric engine, in theory, could be almost instant. So we're down. Alright, so let's pay attention now. We're down at 30 meters per second. I'm going to apply 25% power, retract gear and brakes, start tipping it up to escape the Earth a little bit. Are we below the power curve? Yes, we are, because we're losing airspeed, and I did that on purpose, basically just to see how far I can push this thing. 25% power. We are down to 15, and our velocity vector is still climbing, and we're finally descending now. So we're going to tip the nose over. We will descend. Holy crap, we're descending way too much. I'm going to go full power and pull it back up. See, that was definitely, in real life, a awful go-around procedure. But it worked out okay for us. And also in real life it would have worked out, I suppose. It just wouldn't have been safe or ideal in any way. So we'll go time warp again. We'll get this thing out a little ways at maximum power. And we'll pull the power back to like 50% just for fun. And then we'll pull the power back to nothing. Slow it down a little bit. Alright, so now that we're slowed down a little bit, I do want power in the turn, so we'll give it full power. And the engines are spooling up. I'm not sure why it wasn't giving me kilonewtons. Maybe I clicked something wrong, but I saw the fuel flow going up. Oh, there's the full sheet. Oh, I clicked on that. That's what it was. Instead of the actual engine. Ramjet engine. So we're going 250 meters per second, and we're, I don't know, maybe a couple kilometers away from the space station, so we're going to definitely slow this thing down by cutting the engines. First of all, letting that airspeed drop. We're going to deploy the speed brakes and the gear, because I think we're going pretty fast for how close we are. Want to get this landing down around 50 meters per second, and we'll time warp to get us closer in there. And you can see up here, we're just now starting to descend. We're 60 meters per second. And the reason I'm not concerned with this, even though I want to touch down at 50, is because airspeed is life, altitude is life insurance. So watch this. We're going to retract everything to make it slippery. And 25 meters per second. So we're descending probably behind the power curve there. But then you tip it down, and again, it's so slippery. It just picks up all this speed without having to do anything. The only problem with this is, because it works so well at slow aerodynamic speeds, this landing takes a long time. Because it's so slippery and you want to land at a slow speed, it takes a long time to slow down, and then because of that, it takes a long time to, you know, glide in, I guess. So we are just cruising in here. Am I time warp? Nope. Time warp it. And there we go. Alright, so now the thing to remember too is that when you maneuver this, it actually is very effective braking. If you really need to maneuver this, just pitch it up and down, because all these flight surfaces in the back create quite a bit of drag, and the whole thing, I guess, creates a bit of drag when you're turning it into the wind. So we are at 70 meters per second. We want to slow that down. How are we doing on altitude? A couple meters. Problem is the space program, or the space center, doesn't sit. I should probably check the altitude so I actually know what I'm working with. But alright, there's 50 meters per second. And as you can see, if I pulled up, it would actually climb, as it just did. So maybe we want to touch down at 35 meters a second or so. Basically, in real life, how you want to do this, and how I'm going to try to do this in KSP, is get it to where it's at the slowest, right above the ground, the slowest possible flying airspeed, and we are going to miss it just a little bit. There we go. I added a little bit of power at the end. In real life, that may have done something. Here, I'm not sure if it did. They did obviously spool up. I don't know. It might have been too late. So, there you go. That is the SR-71 Blackbird. Again, I'd like to do a whole series. Oh, 69 meters. So I'll keep that as a mental note for how high this is, so I know what I'm working with. But point being, I'd like to do a whole series on KSP. That'd be really fun, but the channel's brand new, just starting out still, so probably just do a couple of these little ones. I've got a space shuttle-like craft coming out in a couple of weeks. This will probably come out March 7th, which is a Tuesday. Normally I don't do videos on Tuesdays, but this will hopefully just be a short, fun one. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and leave comments of what video games you want to see. And if there's a Patreon account in the description if you've got some extra cash you want to help support the channel. And also an email address if you feel the need to email me for whatever reason. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.